Okay, hi, we will be doing the respiration in humans now. So, for respiration in humans, why do we undergo respirations? Living organisms, we usually, as living things, right, we tend to undergo respiration. Not breathing, breathing is a separate process. Breathing is actually a physical process, while respiration is a chemical process. Due to the need for energy, so as to carry out our daily activities. Okay, so energy is always required for us to actually move, to grow, to excrete, and to reproduce. And these are generally obtained from, well, the main source is generally obtained from the food we eat. So to use the energy available in food, living things needs to break down the food molecules through a process called oxidation, and that the oxidation of food molecules to produce such energy is what we call respiration. So for aerobic respiration, it is the breakdown of food molecules in the presence of oxygen, and it results in the production of a large amount of energy and gives off carbon dioxide and water as waste products. So in our previous lesson, we learned about metabolic waste products, right? This is an example of a metabolic waste products generated. It is also crucial for you to remember the chemical equations for pure bio students, and for combined bio, it would just a general word equation would be sufficient. What about anaerobic respiration? Anaerobic respiration is the respiration in which oxygen is not involved. That means you do not need oxygen to actually create energy. But having said that, without oxygen, this will then reduce the efficiency of the process in the sense that you are generating lesser amount of energy. Okay, and the chemical equation is through glucose, you actually form lactic acid and energy. Okay, just divide the molecule into two. So what happens when you exercise? Now this is a very common structure question or essay question which you must be able to explain. So first of all, during vigorous exercise, your muscles will always contract vigorously to enable movement. This will then generate an increase in the respiratory rate and heart rate to enable more oxygen to reach the muscles. Sometimes the rate of you breathing in will also increase. Okay, and if the intent of all this is to get more oxygen to be transported around your body so that your cells are able to get the oxygen. Okay, breathing rate is to get oxygen from the external environment into your body. So if the increase in oxygen intake is not able to meet this demand, your body will undergo something called an oxygen debt. This will then result in the body to kick in the next process, which is anaerobic respiration, to then also produce energy. Now do take note that we also do, if you do your math right, you realize that the anaerobic respiration is not able to overtake or to cover to replace the energy that's required. So what will happen is the lactic acid, right, has another feature where such that the lactic acids being accumulated in the muscle will cause you fatigue and even muscle pain, such as muscle cramp. So when you have a muscle cramp, you know that your body cannot even move at all. This will slow you down, and therefore your body will then be able to take in even more oxygen by reducing your physical activity and will to repay the oxygen debt. Now, how do we actually investigate or to understand respiration? We can do a few experiments. So number one, we can identify respiration through the production of carbon dioxide gas. So what we can see is, if we have this typical setup which can come out as an MCQ, you have your potassium hydroxide solution. Now your potassium hydroxide solution intention is to mainly to remove carbon dioxide in the air. Your lime water is there to test for the presence of carbon dioxide gas. If carbon dioxide gas is not present, then the air from A to B can then channel to C, so the experiment is fair. However, if there is lime water present at B, this will then means that there is some leak somewhere and you will have to replace the whole experiment. So due to respiration, which produces carbon dioxide gas, D would actually turn the lime water to form white precipitate and effervescence, due to the presence of carbon dioxide gas from respiration. So in this experimental setup, air and CO2 will be entered into A. This is generally air. Potassium hydroxide solution will take in all the CO2, leaving to just oxygen only. As oxygen enters into B, there is no other air components, therefore oxygen will then flow to C. Your snails will breathe in oxygen, take in oxygen, and produce CO2 out through the process of respiration, and therefore CO2 is then channeled into D. That's why the lime water would turn chalky, or white precipitate will form with effervescence, indicating that respiration has occurred. If let's say respiration did not occur, lime water at D will also remain clear, and they shouldn't turn at all. Another example is this one, whereby we use glucose and yeast in the process of fermentation, and this is to mainly show anaerobic respiration, where carbon dioxide is a product of anaerobic respiration as well. So glucose that is used was first boiled and cooled to remove the dissolved oxygen from the solution. This can come out as a question in asking you what's the purpose of heating the test tube. Okay, and due to limited oxygen available, as you have already placed a layer of oil to block off the oxygen, what will happen? The yeast will then undergo anaerobic respiration through fermentation. Now do take note that fermentation doesn't happen in the human body, as there is no yeast available in the human body. Instead, this fermentation can be seen through making of wine or bread. So why bread will actually rise up is due to the production of carbon dioxide from fermentation. So if carbon dioxide is released during anaerobic respiration of yeast, the lime water would also turn chalky. Another thing is that heat is also a product of respiration, as energy is created. So a vacuum flask helps to prevent heat from escaping, allowing us to actually measure the temperature of the heat provided. So the cotton wool will help to allow gaseous exchange between the seed and the environment. This will then allow antiseptic solution to prevent the growth of the antiseptic solution will help to prevent the growth of microorganisms like bacteria, as bacteria can also undergo respiration. Okay, so what we want to see is just the heat generated from the pea seeds, and if the heat is really produced during respiration, the thermometer will increase of a higher temperature than the surrounding. Do note that the bottle has to be turned upside down to allow the contact of the pea seed to the bulb of the thermometer. In the event that it didn't, okay, just like how the diagram actually shows, you would see that the thermometer would always be not touching the bulb of the thermometer, will not be in contact with the pea seeds, and air is actually a very bad conductor of heat, so you will not get an accurate measure. So why the need for a respiratory system? Humans are generally large organisms that are made of million cells, and we have a very, very large volume, but also not a large surface area. So we have a small surface area to volume ratio, unlike your unicellular organisms. Therefore, just like the need for a circulatory system, we will need a special set of organs, a system of organs, to help to assist in the gaseous exchange between the environment and the bodies. And there are actually two main mechanisms in place. One is respiration, the other is breathing, where breathing actually involves taking in air from the external environment to the body. So the structure of the human lungs begins with the nasal cavity, whereby the fringe of hairs and the mucus layer on the walls of the nasal cavity helps to remove any dust and foreign particles. So this one is like acting as a filter. So as the air passes through the air passage, it is moist and warm. It should follow according to the temperature of your human body. The tractive, which is generally just a C It's just generally a C-shaped ring of cartilage that helps to support the trachea to be open. So this is where we allow breathing to take place quite easily. And therefore, in the event that any of this is broken, this will result in the collapse of the trachea, therefore air will not be able to enter. Sometimes when you choke, this area is actually blocked to prevent and then oxygen or air to be transported again. On the inner walls of the trachea, the bronchi are gland cells and ciliated cells. So the gland cells helps to produce mucus to trap particles and bacteria in the air. So these are like more of a sticky layer. Okay, while you have your ciliated cells, which have all your cilia, to actually act like a sweeper, to actually trap the dust particles and to also help to channel all of these upwards of your mouth so that you can expel it. These ciliated cells, they have the cilia that sweeps the trapped particles and bacteria up the bronchi and trachea into the pharynx. Next, we have the next area, which is the bronchioles, where the lungs generally lie in the pleural cavity. So within the lungs, the bronchi tubes will divide to form bronchioles, and these bronchioles will end up in clusters of air clusters, which are your alveoli. So over here. So while you have only two major branches of bronchus, you would have multiple branches of bronchi, which will then lead to many clusters of alveoli. So the alveoli are the site of gaseous exchange, and having a lot or numerous alveoli in the lungs helps to increase the total surface area to volume ratio for gaseous exchange. Now, it is important that you need to understand the structure and adaptation of the alveoli, as well as how it performs its function. So the alveoli are generally well supplied with blood capillaries to help enable the efficiency of exchange of gases exchange. Having a lot of blood capillaries helps to do the loading and unloading of your oxygen and carbon dioxide across the alveoli fast enough. Okay. Second, the alveoli surface is coated with a thin film of moisture or water to allow your gas to actually dissolve in it. So this aids in the gas to actually dissolve into the blood vessels as well. Because initially the gases are in a gas state, whereas what is transported may not be in a gaseous state. The cell of each alveolus is also one cell thick and is generally supplied by capillaries, which are also one cell thick. So this reduces the distance between the cell as well as the alveoli to allow a shorter distance for the gas to actually be diffused, and this would then increase the rate of diffusion of oxygen or carbon dioxide gas. Next is the direction. Do take note that carbon dioxide tends to come in from this area of the alveoli first, if depending the direction of the flow is in this way. Why? This is because the area or the blood vessels coming from here tends to come from the pulmonary artery, where the blood is actually deoxygenated. The cells have already used the oxygen, therefore it's deoxygenated, channeled to the lungs for exchange. Carbon dioxide diffuse out as concentration in CO2 is high at the start here and lower in the alveoli. So this will then result in carbon dioxide to channel outwards into the alveoli, and having a lower oxygen concentration, oxygen will then diffuse into the blood vessel again at the later part, which will then be brought to the pulmonary vein to subsequently be pumped by the heart to all parts of the body. How is oxygen transported? Just a recap, it mainly binds to the hemoglobin in the red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. Next is this one. One thing to take note is this name called carbonic anhydrase. So carbon dioxide molecules from the respiring cells will enter the red blood cells in the bloodstream. The carbon dioxide will then react with the water to form carbonic acid. So while CO2 reacts with H2O to form a carbonic acid, which is summation of H2CO3, Okay, this reaction generally is being catalyzed by the enzyme in red blood cells, which is a carbonic anhydrase. Now this carbonic carbonic acid, because it tends to be not that stable, they can be converted into your hydrogen carbonate ions, or mainly your H plus ions, and then they will diffuse out of the red blood cells and into the blood plasma. Your blood will then be transporting all these to the rest of the body. Okay, most of the carbon dioxide is transported as hydrogen carbonate ions in the blood plasma and not the red blood cell, because the red blood cell would want to occupy more oxygen molecules. Now we are looking into the breathing mechanisms of the lung, but before that, let's look at the general outline of how the lungs looks like. So first of all, you have a nasal cavity, your trachea, and then it will eventually branch into your bronchus, and then into your bronchi, and into your cluster of alveoli. Do remember the passage for all this, because in exam, in MCQ, you might be required to rearrange the order. So this is the order in which air actually flows from the nasal cavity to the cluster of alveoli, mainly how oxygen is taken in. In the event of carbon dioxide gas, it is actually the other way around. Okay, so the ribs helps to support the chest wall, and that there are two sets of muscles that can be formed between the ribs, and they are your external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. These are generally antagonistic muscles, where one would contract and the other would generally relax. So the intercostal muscles will move the rib cage up and down during breathing to help to facilitate the movement, the increase of your thoracic cavity and adjustment of the pressure. The diaphragm is another dome-shaped sheet of elastic muscles that helps to contract and relax to change the volume of your cavity. This is located at the bottom. So again, for those of you who wants to hold more air inside your body, you will need to actually train the strength of your diaphragm. Now this is the one that is important. So what happens for air to actually enter? First step will be the diaphragm will contract and flatten down. Okay, as it contracts, it becomes smaller in size. That's why it tends to float downwards a bit. And what will this lead to? Your external and intercostal muscles, the external intercostals will first contract, your internal intercostal muscles will relax. Due to this action, your rib cage will then be raised upwards and outwards. So as you breathe in, you realize that your body rib will actually move up and also out. Your whole chest will actually move upwards. Okay, then this will then result in a thoracic volume to increase within your lungs. The thoracic volume is the volume that is found inside your lungs, and this will then result in an a decrease in pressure. When you increase the volume, you will actually decrease the pressure inside the lungs, air pressure in the lungs. This will then result in air to rush into your lungs. Okay. For expiration, on the other hand, which is breathing out, your diaphragm relaxes. This will then result in your arch to actually move upwards, resulting in your external intercostal muscles to relax, your internal costal muscles to contract, and your ribs will then move downwards and inwards. This will cause the thoracic volume to decrease in the lungs, and therefore the pressure, air pressure, also to reduce. Both would, due to this action, the air would then be rushing from the lungs out into the environment, as air usually moves from a high pressure region to a lower pressure region. Okay, these are some models to show the model of ribs moving in and during the breathing. This one you can pause the video to take a look. So what generally stimulates breathing? Now, one common misconception is that when you do CPR, you are actually giving oxygen to the person who has just drowned. The answer is not true. What you are actually breathing out is actually contains carbon dioxide gas, actually higher concentration of carbon dioxide gas. So what happens is that for the human body, when you are injecting carbon dioxide gas into the human's body, you are forcing your body to actually take in even more oxygen content. So what you want is your body will want to breathe out first and then slowly clear the lungs and then to take in air again. So carbon dioxide is generally the stimulus for breathing rather than oxygen. Okay. And next, finally we look at the different components of the cigarette smoke. This is the one that you have to remember and memorize, as it's a common essay question where they can ask you what are some of the components of cigarette smoke. So some of the ones are: number one, nicotine; second is carbon monoxide; third, irritants and tar. Not just naming, but you also need to know its effects. So for nicotine, they are the ones that are responsible to give the person, the smoker, the addictive effect, and this makes blood clot very, very easily. Okay, while your blood clots are able to clot easily, especially at the regions of the the cardiac arteries, the coronary arteries, this will then result in blood clots in the region, reducing the lumen, and hence blood flow to supply oxygen to the heart will be reduced. Hence, this will then increase the risk of heart diseases. Carbon monoxide tends to be able to bind to red blood cells quite easily, especially the hemoglobin. So it decreases the ability of the red blood cells to transport oxygen and increase the rate at which fats are deposited on the inner walls of the arterial walls. So again, this will lead to the increase in the risk of arteriosclerosis and also coronary heart diseases. Okay, so carbon monoxide generally combats with oxygen, with hemoglobin. So at your red blood cells, they will actually not transport oxygen, instead they will actually transport carbon monoxide. This drastically reduces the number of red blood cells able to transport oxygen in your body, and you can eventually die. Irritants wise, they tend to paralyze the ciliary lining in the air passage and increase the risk of chronic bronchitis or Episema, which we will actually be discussing more later. Tar, it's also carcinogenic, meaning cancer causing. They will paralyze the ciliary lining in the air passage, resulting in more actually phlegms, okay, and the mucus generated by your glands in your trachea region, and it will eventually be clogged up. So all these, right, due to the paralyzation of this ciliary lining, all these particles will not be able to remove out of your mouth and it will be stuck there. So this will then also reduce the efficiency of gaseous exchange within your alveoli. So what is chronic bronchitis? In chronic bronchitis, the epithelial lining in the air walls is inflamed, meaning it tends to be swollen. There is excessive secretion of mucus, as well as the ciliary lining tends to be paralyzed. So imagine if you have a lot of all this mucus surrounding this region. This will continue to stuck to trap all the bacteria and all the particles there, resulting in an even more inflammation. Next, the ciliary lining, because it is paralyzed, it is not able to sweep or to remove the mucus out from your mouth. So as your glands produce even more, and there is no form of ciliary assistant to actually get rid of it, you will actually form a lot of phlegm, and you can actually reduce your airflow for taking in oxygen. So these some of the symptoms will be breathing difficulty due to blocked airways, and of course persistent cough to actually try to clear the blocked airways. Episema, on the other hand, is where the partial walls of your alveoli tends to break down due to the violent coughing. So after chronic bronchitis, right, you tend to have a lot of cough. This cough of violent action will actually rupture the walls of your alveoli, leading it to actually reduce the surface area to volume ratio to actually allow gaseous exchange. The lungs will also lose its elasticity and cannot be and become inflated with air, meaning, right, the lungs, right, will not be able to take in more oxygen or more air. Okay, and so what are some difficulty? You have a lot of difficulty in breathing and has a whistling sound. Okay, and that is all mainly for this chapter. I will see you